What's up, YouTube? Zero here. And today I have an awesome combination of Gengar and Mismagius. In this video, I'll go over the deck build that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. I'll talk about each of these cards individually, what I like about them, and how they really pair well with each other. Before I get into it, I do want to say if you do enjoy this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more Pokemon TCG content. I do a bunch of other video games, so feel free to check those out as well. Without further ado, let's talk about this card combination. So to start, I want to say, of course, Ghost type is my favorite type in Pokemon. Gengar is my favorite Pokemon. So I'm trying to find new ways to come out with great Ghost decks, fun Ghost decks, and ones that really work well for Gengar. This Gengar Mismagius combination is absolutely fantastic. Of course, it does have a few drawbacks, which I will get to later in the video. I'm surprised that Gengar EX isn't utilized more often, especially because of its ability. So while I'm on Gengar EX, let's talk about Gengar. Gengar EX's ability, Shadowy Spellbind. As long as Gengar EX is in that active slot, your opponent cannot use any supporter cards. This is extremely nice and can be crucial to changing the tides of battle. Gengar EX also has Spooky Shot, so for 3 Ghost Energy or Psychic Energy, you do Spooky Shot for 100 damage. You can see in this clip with my Gengar EX in that active slot, even if my opponent wanted to, my opponent could not use Irida, which heals all Pokemon with water energy on it for 40. So my opponent wouldn't have been able to do that. My opponent can't utilize Professor's Research, which allows them to draw 2 cards, allowing them to get to the cards they may want deeper in their deck. I'm preventing them from doing that. They can't utilize Cyrus to get to an injured Pokemon on my bench. They can't utilize Sabrina to switch out my Gengar EX. There are so many Pokemon trainer cards that Gengar is going to prevent my opponent from using. So it's going to be crucial to winning the battle. Now I am going to have the Gengar EX evolution line. Gengar EX, the Ghastly I have in this deck, and the Haunter I have in this deck are all going to come from Genetic Apex Mewtwo deck. So just be aware of that. The reason why I like this Ghastly and Haunter combination is Ghastly, 1 Ghost Energy or 1 Psychic Energy for 20 damage. Haunter, 1 energy for 30 damage. I like the 1 evolution cards that only require 1 energy, because if I do have my turn first, then I can immediately evolve and attack. I don't have to wait for a second energy to equip. So I do a lot of times like to have that just 1 evolution, 1 energy. It also plays well into the second Gengar that I have in this deck. That's right, this deck I'm running 2 different Gengars. If you want, you can just run Gengar EX, as Gengar EX is extremely powerful. But I like to throw my opponents off, and I also like to utilize whatever Gengar feels right in the battle. There are some times where Gengar, non-EX, is going to be nice to come out and just hit my opponent for quick damage and also put them asleep. So let's talk about this Gengar. This second Gengar has Hypnoblast. For 2 Ghost Energy, it deals 70 damage and automatically puts your opponent to sleep. So this can be extremely nice. You get a pretty quick hit, of course, after a few evolutions for 70 damage, but you can also put your opponent to sleep. So you're going to either force them to evolve, force them to flip a coin in the hopes that they can wake up, or force your opponent to the bench so they can attack you. It can absolutely flip the tide of battle, and also works really well with Mismagius. This deck is more or less going to be focused on status conditions. Gengar EX is a nice change of pace because it does stop supporter cards, but all of the other Pokemon cards in this deck are focused upon inflicting status conditions. Gengar, the Gengar that I just talked about, is from the Triumphant Light deck, going to inflict sleep. Now let's talk about my Misdreavus and Mismagius EX. So Misdreavus, the one I have in this deck, is actually a promo card, but for 1 energy, it's Confuse Ray. The opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. So of course they flip a coin and they may not be able to attack me if they get Tails. So that's nice because I'm enhancing the survivability of my Misdreavus and my Mismagius EX. So I do like Confuse Ray. However, there is another Misdreavus in the game that's 1 energy dealing 20 damage. So if you don't have an opportunity or you don't have this promo Misdreavus, just put in that other Misdreavus. It's not going to hurt you too bad. You're going to be just dealing more damage and not confusing your opponent. Then we have Mismagius EX, which is from the Palkia deck. And this, for 2 energy, of course only 1 evolution, Magical Delusion. 70 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. Keeping with the status effect condition, you can really defeat your opponent by really not allowing them to attack. They're confused, they flip a coin, and there's a potential that they can't attack you, which is awesome. I don't have any cards in this deck that are healing up Pokemon. I am really focused on either throwing Gengar EX out there to stop my opponents from utilizing supporter cards, or I am focused on stopping them from attacking by putting them to sleep or confusing them. So the hope is that I don't have any healing cards in this deck, but I don't need them because I'm inflicting status conditions and I'm stopping my opponent from attacking me. Now let's get into the support cards that I love utilizing. Pokeball and Professor's Research are obvious. Pokeball is going to draw a basic Pokemon from the deck to my hand, allowing me to get the Pokemon I may need quicker. Professor's Research, you draw 2 cards, so of course allowing me to get to the cards in my deck that I need a little bit quicker as well. Rocky Helmet, if damaged, if the Pokemon in the active slot is damaged by an attack, the attacking Pokemon takes 20 damage. This is going to be important because this deck does not deal a lot of damage. Gengar EX deals the most at 100 damage. So utilizing Rocky Helm to inflict more damage upon my Pokemon or my opponent's active Pokemon is going to be crucial to winning the battle. The 2 other support cards that I have in this deck are Sabrina and Cyrus. I love utilizing these cards, especially in combination with status conditions and Gengar EX not allowing my opponent to utilize support cards. Let's talk about Gengar EX in combination with Sabrina and Cyrus first. Gengar EX in that active slot with Sabrina and Cyrus in hand can really control the battlefield. Your opponent can no longer use Leaf if Gengar EX is in that active slot. So forcing one of your opponent's Pokemon into that active slot is now going to force them to either use X speed, which most opponents aren't running, or is going to force them to equip energy on the Pokemon in that active slot to make them retreat if they didn't want that Pokemon in the active slot to begin with. That's extremely important strategy and can really turn the tide of battle in your favor, forcing your opponent to waste energy to draw back a Pokemon they're not ready to have in that active slot. So I love that combination with Gengar EX. On top of that, Sabrina and Cyrus are going to be great in combination with dealing status effects. Of course, putting a Pokemon to sleep with Gengar or confusing them with Mismagius EX is going to force them to have their Pokemon retreat if they cannot evolve, or alleviate that status condition. So Cyrus is going to pull out those Pokemon if they're weakened, if your opponent did decide to make them retreat. Or Sabrina is going to force some form of Pokemon into the active slot that your opponent may not want there. So I absolutely love these two trainer cards with this deck combination. They can really throw off your opponent's strategy and allow you to impose your will in the game. Now, I did say at the beginning of the video, I was going to talk about some of the drawbacks of this deck. Now, one drawback I did allude to earlier is that the deck is not dealing a ton of damage. The strategy of this deck is really to impose your will and control the playing field in battle. You're not going to be doing a ton of damage, but you will have control of the battle with either your Gengar EX out there, not allowing your opponent to play their trainer cards, or with confusing or making your opponent sleep. They're not going to be able to attack you, which means they can't inflict damage, which means while you're dealing damage to your opponent's Pokemon, they're not going to be able to deal damage to you, which is going to allow you to survive longer and inflict your will upon opponents more. Either that, or your opponent is going to have to utilize resources, either energy or cards, to force a retreat from their active Pokemon so they can alleviate those status conditions. This is going to allow the tide of battle to turn in your favor. This is why I love this deck. However, another drawback of a deck like this, and lucky enough, the Shining Revelry pack did come out, but prior to that release, the Arceus EX decks really destroyed the strategy of this deck. For those of you who don't know, Arceus EX has an ability, and the ability is it cannot be afflicted with special conditions. So even though I have Mismagius, I have non-EX Gengar that can inflict status conditions, Arceus EX is not affected by them. So facing an Arceus EX deck is a lot harder than other decks because Arceus cannot be afflicted with status conditions. The way to win that battle against an Arceus EX deck is going to be through Gengar EX. So it is a little bit harder against those type of decks. It's not impossible. I have defeated them before with this deck, but it does take a little bit more luck. Hopefully drawing your Gengar EX, or hopefully your opponent isn't filling their bench with Pokemon and powering up their Arceus EX. So it is possible, but just a little bit harder. However, this deck is extremely fun. You're going to be dealing a lot of different status conditions. You're going to be preventing your opponent from attacking you, and you're going to be putting that Gengar EX in that active slot and preventing your opponent from utilizing trainer cards. There are a lot of different ways to win the battle with this deck, and it can be really frustrating for your opponent when they can't attack or they can't utilize trainer cards. This is a really fun deck that allows you to control the battlefield and win. I've been winning a lot with this against a lot of very good decks. You saw earlier that I was able to defeat a Moltres Charizard deck. I was able to defeat a Palkia deck. I'm defeating right now a Leafeon Celebi deck. So this deck can absolutely compete with some of the meta decks. It's extremely fun, and you can have fun with it too. Let me know in the comments section what you think of this deck. Have you utilized something similar with Gengar and Mismagius? I want to hear your opinions on which cards you may substitute out to make this deck even better and which ones you'd substitute in. Again, I love this deck. I love utilizing Gengar and Ghost type Pokemon because Ghost type's my favorite and Gengar is my favorite Pokemon. So I love utilizing deck with Gengar in it and making it work. Gengar EX is an extremely powerful Pokemon, and I'm really surprised more people don't use it because being able to stop opponents from utilizing trainer cards can help you win the game a lot easier. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, peace.